Okay, Boo, I got a question for you. If you've ever been in an abusive relationship, have you ever dealt with the guilt? Now, when I say guilt, it's a very layered thing, right? Because you actually genuinely feel guilty that you left. You feel guilty that you left the person that was hurting you. And then you realize that you shouldn't be guilty because they did hurt you. And so you feel guilt about the guilt. But then you feel it anyway, and you're trying to give yourself grace. So you feel guilt about the guilt about the guilt. If you can relate to this, one, you are so not alone. And personally, when I was first on my journey, I didn't know how to explain this to anyone. And frankly, when I did try to, everyone looked at me like I was crazy. The moment I said the word guilt, they all just jumped on me and said how awful he was, how much he hurt me, and how I shouldn't feel guilty to begin with, as if that hadn't ever crossed my mind. So, when it comes to guilt and abuse recovery, this topic can be really overwhelming and really confusing. And so that's why I knew it was high time to dive into this, and that's what we're talking about today. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to introduce myself. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Karleigh Saunders, and I am your confidence and abuse recovery coach. This is the Karleigh Show, where we talk about all things abuse recovery, abuse prevention, education, as well as tips and tricks to build your confidence so that way you can see your worth and fight back. Now, let's get back to the guilt. So, first and foremost, before we get any deeper into this, why do we feel this guilt? Why does this guilt exist? Now, this is for a variety of reasons, but at the most basic level, it's because you're a really good person who got sucked into a really awful game. The more you're with your abuser, the more your brain becomes attached to them and eventually even addicted to them. And yes, I said addicted. And if you want more information on that, go check out the video that I did on abuse and the brain. And I will make sure I link that in the description as well as here. So you can just click the info card. You take it as your personal responsibility to take care of this person, to make sure that they don't hurt anyone else or themselves without even caring about what happens to you. This is a really brief overview as to what a trauma bond is. And if you're not sure, if you've never heard that term before, I did a couple podcast episodes on it. I'll make sure that I link those below as well. I want to make sure that you have as many resources at your fingertips as possible, because information is not just life-changing, but it could potentially be life-saving. So now make sure you check the description for all the links to any resources that I referenced in today's video. Before we go any further, let's talk about our obsession with making sure that they don't destroy themselves for a second. One of the most important things to recognize, and that a lot of people don't understand, and if you've never been in an abusive relationship, it doesn't make logical sense because our brains aren't thinking logically. But again, you can find more information about that in that video. But because our brains aren't thinking logically, all we think about is how much we care about them. Right? The only reason we got into the situation is because we care about them. We love them. We want what's best for them, because that's what happens when you care. The downside to this is that it's very one-sided and they will genuinely use you. This is really well explained when you look at the relationship between the Joker and Harley Quinn. Now, I could go on and on and on about this forever. Like, when I say hours, I mean days, hours. And it really hurts my soul when I see people saying, oh, I want a relationship like Harley Quinn and Joker. Why? No, you don't. I have been in a relationship with a Joker, and let me tell you, it is not fun. But looking at that relationship is a really good example as to what a trauma bond is and to how we get addicted to the abuser. She got so obsessed with doing everything he wanted that she lost who she was. She completely dropped everything for her and cared about him. Because she cared about him. That's all she cared about. And she got sucked into that trap until she eventually got out. This is not a plug, but Birds of Prey, one of the very few DC movies I actually enjoy. I dig it. But anyway, let's continue. This exact behavior, not to the extreme as Harley Quinn, sometimes, but I see this behavior over and over again, not only in myself, but in clients, in followers, and in my friends that approach me. And y'all, this is really, really important to understand. The reason you feel guilty about walking away is because the abuser has been through things. They've been through things that made them the abuser. And because of that, we want to be there for them. We want to be there to hold their hand. We want to fix them because we know how it feels to go through things and we are hurting so bad. We don't want them to hurt that way. And on some level, we understand that they're hurting us because they hurt, and we feel if we can just heal that hurt enough, if we can just fix that hurt enough, if we can just find the right Band-Aid, if we can love them enough, if we can care about them enough, that we can fix it. And admitting that we can't fix it doesn't necessarily hit as, oh, I can't, so I'm just gonna let it go. It hits like, I wasn't good enough. Maybe if I was enough, maybe if I could get him to love me more, maybe if I was skinnier, maybe if I was curvier, maybe if I said the right things, maybe if I wasn't so stubborn, maybe if I did that thing that he wanted me to do, maybe if I didn't have boundaries, maybe if I didn't say no, then maybe I would have been enough for him. This is why we feel so guilty when we leave these relationships, because we get stuck in these mind games and we end up feeling responsible. And we forget that we are enough and they were the problem. Just a little side note here. Just because someone has been through trauma does not give them permission to treat you like garbage. Someone's trauma is not permission for them to treat you as their emotional punching bag. Trust me, I've been the punching bag and I've been the toxic person who treated other people like garbage. Neither of them are okay. We are all responsible for our own lives and our own healing and our own recovery. There isn't an amount of trauma that gives someone the right to treat us like garbage. I'm going to say a few phrases and I want you to repeat after me. I am only responsible for me and my behavior. It is not my job to fix someone else. It is not my job to be someone else's emotional or physical punching bag. Now, I would love it if you would take those and make them your affirmations. Write them down, put them on sticky notes, make it your phone background, stick one on your bathroom mirror, stick one on your steering wheel in your car. Put them anywhere and everywhere so you can constantly have these reminders. As survivors, we get so stuck in policing other people's behavior and we think that we can control it, when the reality is the only thing that we can control is our thoughts. The only thing that we can control is our thoughts, our actions, our reactions. The only thing we can focus on is us. And as hard as it is, accepting that we can't change other people is the biggest gift that we can give ourselves. I've got a question for you. Do you really want to let go of the guilt? Now, before you roll your eyes and answer, well, duh, I want you to think about this for a minute. As humans, anything and everything we do because we get something out of it, right? We will get up and walk to the fridge because there's going to be some good stuff in there that we can eat. We stay in these abusive relationships because we're getting something out of it. Our brain is getting that hit of chemicals, right? So there is a reason that we're holding on to this guilt. And one of those reasons could be the fact that we are punishing ourselves. We feel like it's our fault. As much as I talk about how much I hate when people say, oh my gosh, you should have just left, one of the reasons that it really pisses me off is because as survivors, we say that enough to ourselves. And this is something I am still giving myself grace for. I have been out for almost 4 years. I've been on my recovery for just over 3 years now. And I'm still struggling to catch myself when I say, well, if you would have left, it wouldn't have gotten so bad. And the reason why it pisses me off, well, there's a number of reasons why it pisses me off when other people say it, but especially because we say it to ourselves all the time. And because we say it to ourselves all the time, it perpetuates this idea that we have to beat ourselves up, that it's our fault that we didn't leave sooner, that it's our fault that we got in there. It's our fault that we stayed, and it's our fault that it got that bad. And so how dare we try to live without the guilt? Because if we live without the guilt, then we are not living with that constant punishment. And if we are not living with that constant punishment, then one, we may end up back there again, or two, we may, for whatever reason, be free of that guilt. And if we're free of that guilt, that's not right. But why is it not right? I am so passionate about building your self-worth and building your confidence, because as you do that, you're going to heal these wounds. Now, like I said, I'm still working through this. So I am not claiming that it's an easy journey. I've been on this journey for over 3 years. And yes, I have come a really long way and I am so proud of myself, but I have by no means done. I personally don't believe there's any done when it comes to recovery. But I believe there's healing, I believe there's growth, and I believe that there's so much more life to live than constant misery. And that brings me to my next point. If we let go of the guilt, if we really let go of the guilt that we feel, then we have to admit to ourselves that there's more to life than constant misery. And I talk about this a lot on my podcast, and if you follow me on social media, but there's this thing called the comfortable uncomfortable. Our brains crave predictability. It craves consistency, even though we may not be comfortable in the situation, even though we may not like that he yells at us every day after he gets home from work, even though we may not like how she throws her stuff at us when she's upset. We don't know, even though we don't like those things, even though we may physically get attacked, there's a predictability. Our brain knows what to expect. It knows what's going to happen tomorrow, and it knows it's going to happen the next day. Even though we may not like it, there's predictability. Now, this is by no means victim blaming, but I'm telling you how the brain works. When we get in these situations, our brain not only lives on the honeymoon moments, but it lives on consistency. So yeah, it sucks. It sucks to be in the abusive relationship, and it doesn't like being yelled at, and it doesn't like being physically assaulted, and it doesn't like being manipulated, and it doesn't like all those things, but it likes that it knows what's going to happen. Because what if you get out of the abusive relationship? Or what if you let go of the guilt? And what if you stop beating yourself up and then you find something else? What if you let go of the guilt and you start living your life only to have something else bad happen? What if? And our brain goes to the worst case scenarios. What if we let go of the guilt and we allow ourselves to truly love ourselves? What then? What if we let go of the guilt and then someone else tries to place it back on us? What then? Something I learned something I learned very early on that I'm still trying to break the habit of. I grew up very, very overweight, morbidly obese, and it's been a struggle my entire life. But something I learned very early on is that if you make fun of if I made fun of myself before anyone else could, I was in the clear because they couldn't humiliate me if I humiliated myself, right? And so I learned that if I make a fat joke, that if I make fun of myself, if I call myself all of these mean names for eating, if I made fun of myself for eating the same McDonald's that everybody else was eating, no one else could say anything to me. That same concept applies to guilt and recovery. If we already feel guilty, no one can say anything to make us feel worse. If we already feel awful, we don't have to worry about feeling awful tomorrow. But if we let ourselves not feel awful, well, that's terrifying. And I heard this said on Kathy Heller's Don't Keep Your Day Job podcast. If you're not, even if you're not an entrepreneur, highly, highly recommend that podcast. It is so good. One of the guests on her podcast had made mention that joy is one of the most terrifying things to feel. Because the moment you have it, you risk having it taken away. And when I heard that, I remember I was standing in my kitchen and I was doing dishes. And I stopped and I had to pause the podcast because it just made me so emotional because it's so true. So often we run away from freedom. We run away from feeling joy. We run away from feeling good about ourselves because the moment we do, we risk having it taken from us. But boo, let me tell you something. It is so worth it to let go of the guilt. Letting go of this guilt is a job in and of itself. It takes work. And as you continue that work, you get stronger. And the stronger you get, the more you realize that it's okay not to feel guilty. And the stronger you get, you realize no one else can make you feel guilty because you've got nothing to be guilty for. And it just continues, and you get stronger and you get smarter and you see yourself and you love yourself more each and every day. It's not an overnight thing. I'm not pretending like letting go of the guilt is just an overnight get, like an overnight, oh, I don't feel guilty no more. As you work through this journey, as you put in the work, you're going to become strong enough to handle that type of stuff. The fear that you feel about letting go of the guilt, you will become strong enough to face it along the way. Now, all of that being said, I want you to hear me when I say that I get it. These thoughts of how guilty I felt and how awful I felt and how I wanted to punish myself, those thoughts rang in my ears for so long after I got out. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I genuinely don't know when the guilt subsided. I've spent a lot of time looking back over the last several years, and because I wanted to pinpoint it because I feel so incredibly different than I did just a few years ago. I wanted to pinpoint when the guilt left, and I don't know. I don't know when the guilt decided to pick up and leave, but let me tell you, you know the feeling when you're a kid and you go under that really heavy comforter and it gets really hot, but you're playing hide and go seek, so you're trying to deal with that really hot air, right? That suffocating hot air. But then you finally take it off and you get that breath of fresh air and you just feel free. That's what it feels like. Every day I wake up without the guilt, it just feels like I'm taking a breath of fresh air. And I'm not exaggerating, y'all. Like, I get it. This is real. And even though I don't have a step-by-step process to get rid of the guilt, I do know that while I was doing the other work, the guilt somehow went away. And a lot of that had to do with recognizing my worth. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened to me and thinking about my worth. And I realized that the more I stepped into my worth and the more I stepped into who I was and the more I stepped into what I deserved, the harder it was to feel guilty. I want you to see someone who was literally just a few years ago, not just almost 4 years ago, laying face down on a sheetless mattress on a spare bedroom floor, contemplating taking her life, to being where I am now. I want you to see that as inspiration. I want you to go, oh my gosh, if she can do it, I can do it too. That's why I share this. If you've been waiting for a sign, if you've been waiting for your time, if you've been waiting to commit, this is your sign. Here it is. Start the work, commit to yourself. And if this really resonated with you and you're ready to start like today, I highly recommend you check out my free confidence course. The link is in the description, totally free, no strings attached. This is a 5-day crash course in the skill, yes, skill of confidence. In less than 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you are building the skill of confidence, and you are going to have all of the tools you need to build that confidence and see your worth. And the sooner you see that worth, baby boo, freedom. And I don't say that to exaggerate. I 100% mean it. And that's karleighsaunders.com/confidence. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. And never forget, you are strong. You are capable. You are intelligent. And you are so dang worthy.